and Joe Murphy. They are at the 6th Annual Digital Storytelling Conference in Massachusetts. And Joe Lambert, I believe this is the first time it's been in the Western universe, or Western Hemisphere.
For this side of the solar system, it's the first. No.
So we're very glad to have a chance to connect with you today, and I know we're standing between you and lunch, so we'll keep it brief. If people who are participating would like to just take a moment to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Joe and Joe in Massachusetts.
Oh, you introduce yourself.
I'm Joe Murphy. I'm the director of the Center for Innovative Pedagogy at Kenyon College. And Joe put the arm on me after a workshop this summer to come out to this conference and keep learning more.
Yeah, and again, I'm the founder and executive director of what's called Story Center that last week was called the Center for Digital Storytelling. So we just renamed ourselves. But yeah, the Center for Digital Storytelling is about a 20-year-old organization working as an independent nonprofit in the promotion of a specific method of, or series of methods of participatory media.
Lisa?
Oh, yes, yeah, I'd say I can jump in and go next. I'm Lisa Hammersheim, and I'm just outside of Chicago, and I'm a doctoral student and graphic designer studying kind of studio pedagogy through online medium. So stories are totally up my alley. And my sister also took a digital storytelling workshop this summer in Denver, and I think it was through the Story Center. So she's a huge fan of yours too, and unfortunately she couldn't make it, but she said to say hi. So hi from Sarah.
We'll send the word to Daniel and Marianne, who I'm sure taught them.
Nice.
Sarah?
So I'm Sarah. I'm out in California, and have been teaching language teachers for a while to use digital media and web-based stuff and different multimodal ways of expressing different things. So long history of being interested in digital storytelling.
Good to meet you.
And Autumn.
Hey, I'm Autumn Keynes, and I am the Associate Director of Academic Technology at Capital University in Columbus, Ohio, and I am also a master's student in educational technology at the Ohio State University. And I'm here with Katie. I'll let Katie introduce herself too.
Hi, everyone. I'm also in Columbus. I'm also an educational technology grad student at Ohio State. I'm also the library director at Ohio State University at Newark, Central Ohio Technical College.
And finally, I'm Helen DeWard. I work in Faculty of Education in Ontario, Central Ontario, and one of the big pieces my students are involved in is digital storytelling, so that they can take that into their classroom with their students. The focus is on media and digital literacies, so they learn by doing it. So I'm very excited. I do use the digital storytelling materials from the center and developed by you, Joe. And it really does help set the foundations and frameworks for what the students are doing. So I'm very excited to hear what you're doing at the conference and how the sessions are going.
I'm happy to talk about it. I don't know whether you want to mute yourself because we're picking up your background noise here. Okay. Other people are. You know, as suggested, the digital storytelling community had 9 what we called festivals from 95 to 99 in Colorado, or 8 I should have said, and then 2 in Arizona and 1 in California. That series of events was under the leadership of really my partner in starting this work, a guy named Dana Atchley and his wife Denise Atchley. When they kind of ran out of steam, well, Dana passed away. He ran out of all steam in 2000, but we wanted to also internationalize the work. Most of those festivals were very U.S.-centric. In 2003, we had just finished a large project with the BBC in Wales, in the country of Wales, and that project kind of landed our work in Europe at a much higher level. And so that conference you know, really began to internationalize the work. Obviously, a lot of Europeans were able to make that meeting. We then took the conference to Australia, from Australia to Portugal, Portugal to Norway, and Norway to Ankara, Turkey. in some ways it was very important for our organization to be seen as not just a U.S. idea or an American idea, that it was something that could cross borders and be embraced in other contexts. And obviously over 20 years of our organization going to something like 48 countries, I don't know what that, we can't keep up anymore. But we've been encouraging a perspective that this was a literacy process that could be used in many, many contexts, including across international borders. So this conference, and bringing it back to the United States, we expected it to be the biggest one yet. It has crossed the 325 participant level today, so it's by far the largest gathering of digital storytelling specific discussion that's happened, as far as I know. And we've done a good job of getting some 20 countries involved. But it really is a broad number of American educators. The streams in this reflect the kind of dominant areas of work. Education is a big part of what's being discussed here. There are countless discussions both about the use in a kind of classroom basis, but also a lot of work in research and evaluation and other kind of areas of interest. Our work with the Story Center has gone very strongly into public health, human services, and human rights, and so there's a bunch of work that's being discussed in those contexts, which is about the ways that this is a good intervention for public health educators or people working with people who've experienced trauma, working through the trauma, using the story form as this story process as a way to just kind of get perspective on their experience. And then finally, the other big theme of this is youth work. And we move now over to Umass Amherst, where our intention was to bring another 30 or 40 people under 30 into a series of afternoon panels and workshops where a lot of the discussion will be very specifically about how people have used this, well, obviously education with young people, but probably more specifically with the kind of independent community-based programs that are either after school or in ongoing, connections to young people in communities. So we'll see a lot of presentations and discussions about that. We'll be going over to see the civil rights activist and cultural worker Jane Sapp, who will give us our keynote. And Jane and tonight's program have an heavy emphasis about the specific impact and usefulness of story work and other kinds of cultural work with communities of color in the United States. So there'll be a kind of strong, I wouldn't say related to Black Lives Matter, but certainly to the kind of urgency of African American youth and the struggles that they're facing at this point. So there's going to be that kind of theming. But it's already been, I don't speak for Joseph, it's an extraordinary array of difference. I mean, it's like, you go, God, I haven't even thought about that. I mean, there was a presentation yesterday I saw that was about Hart Island, which is off the coast of Bronx, right? And it's a New York prison island where some 75,000, 65,000 people have been mass buried and are continuing to be mass buried. They're like the anonymous dead of New York. And she's done a marker project where people who knew these people are writing narratives to kind of rediscover the mass buried dead. And this is literally 1,000 babies being put into a pit and left there for several weeks. This is in New York City. This is not some, oh, wow, what's going on? Projects like that just boggle my mind, the complexity and curious ways that people are looking at narrative in the digital landscape here in 2015. So we're getting a lot of the mainstream digital storytelling, which are, things amid small workshops, but we're also getting these kind of new ways of thinking about what's possible. So it's really amazing. I'll let Joe. I mean, he's more of a witness. I'm so in the middle of it. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the big thing for me is that I have not attended I have attended conferences where the American organizers and the American sponsors talk about how great it is that we've got so many countries represented, and every now and then you hear an unfamiliar accent. And it's really eye-opening. We just came out of a session about a program that I guess we could say started as an EU-funded study abroad opportunity with the digital storytelling implement, met other organizations. So to hear, and hearing multiple people from not America presenting their work and the way that they've owned it and recontextualized it is really terrifically important. And I'm sure I've insulted Helen and everyone in her room by not saying American and Canadian, but in many cases that's the experience that I have. So I think it's wonderfully eye-opening to start considering what the cultural relevances of digital storytelling in other cultures, I mean, even in other cultures in America. It's a good way to remind us to think about that, but to think about it in cultures that we'd think of as just not American. It's really worthwhile. So.
Yes, thank you very much. If we can move maybe just through Lisa, then Sarah, and then Autumn, any questions that you might have or want to ask Joe while we have his attention?
I guess I'll go first. Have you seen a lot of digital storytelling kind of being taken up by K-12 education as well as, I mean, because I can picture it very well in higher ed. I can picture it in, kind of intercultural studies and, even kind of peacemaking efforts and that sort of thing. But have you seen it also with younger audiences with the Story Center? Or
yeah, in the late 90s, I was based at UC Berkeley's School of Education, and like one whole stripe of implementation in K-12 was through the National Writing Program and through Pearson, ironically. Meaning, if you go around, I have had the experience that I can walk school in the United States and say, digital storytelling, how is it different than film? And people will go, oh yeah, it's short, and it's it's more imagey, and yeah, somebody has to read a narration, but they're book reports, they're essays, they're essentially that's a form, right? It's not exactly PowerPoint, and it's certainly not filmmaking, right? So in K-12 you will find that, because people would have found let's make an iMovie project, they would call it. Let's make an iMovie project. Let's do a narrated slideshow project. Those are things people would have done whether the word digital storytelling ever existed or not, but a lot of people will call that digital storytelling. So in general, this idea of the highly reflexive part of digital storytelling, and in some ways about personal insight and to some degree a degree of emotional disclosure or vulnerability that's associated with our center, that doesn't work in a K-12 prison. I mean, I'm not a big fan of public school or school. I'm not so sure, but the idea of you feel safe as a 8th grader to talk about how you feel and put it in a movie and share it with your classmates that you still have to be with for the rest of the year, I don't think so. I certainly would have done personal storytelling, but if you tell a story about your cat, I'm going to tell a lovely story about my kitty and how much I love my kitty. And that's legit. I mean, that's not digital storytelling. It's just not associated with some of the more complex practices that have emerged over the 20 years that still get, if there is a mainstream, it's there. On the flip side, I'll say this is a year of a lot of critique of this kind of overly emotive part of the Story Center history, which we didn't exactly promote, but it was interpreted as, you got to put your heart on the table and talk about it. That part is being critiqued from more like the idea of, not everybody's got a happy story. Not everybody wants to be like putting their heart on the table. Can't people just be? And I think that the maturity of the entire field is now we can go from these very wonderful stories to, if you will, more in-depth stories, but then in kind of in a funny way back again to stories that are just simple sharings of a moment in time that may have significance or just are funny or light or something. So it's changed a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was good.
Sarah?
Yeah, my question had to do with kind of following on a piece of what you were talking about. I saw that there was recently a webinar about helping people, I think it was in relation to public health stories, helping people navigate the process of addressing, helping them process something and addressing a more sensitive topic. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about that.
We happen to have obviously attracted people who already had in-depth training as social workers, as public health professionals, to therapeutic professionals, counselors, and they were interested in how they could use the parts of our technologies or our methods to work with the kind of audiences that they were likely to be working with, which were really started in the domestic violence prevention space in California, where Amy Hill learned about our process and brought it into the discussion with that community. Given that we were kind of starting in those kinds of spaces back in 99, 2000, and Amy's extraordinary, sense of integrity around ethical practice within those communities, there was a kind of another wing of the organization that focused on the development of, a kind of first contact to when the movie is shown spectrum of approaches that assure the highest amount of safety and sense of, well-being for any participant deciding to share their story. There's any of us that do that kind of work know that it's not like there's a magic thing you say to people about how to be a trauma worker or something. No, this is really complex psychological work. And generally speaking, our easy solution to our own work is if you're going to work with those people, have all those professionals who have the 5 to 10 to 15 years worth of experience of working with that issue in the room with you at all times to protect you as the facilitator and to certainly protect the storytellers, because the idea, and on top of that, know that you're in a spectrum of work. You ask somebody who says, well, I want you to work with my foster youth, and you ask them, how long have you worked with them? Do they have peer cohort support? What are their psychological support systems? That's before we even say, yeah, we'll do a workshop. It's like, are you qualified to work with us to be able to make sure that when we ask them to tell a story, you've prepared them for that? And certainly when the workshop happens, but equally as important is after the workshop's over, what are you doing? Because this may have triggered an enormous amount of emotional distress, in which case I'm responsible for it, the agency's responsible for it, and there better be a plan of what you're doing to help those people. By making those kinds of ethical demands, we call it, the storyteller's Bill of Rights. Then we're able to negotiate as best we can, given resource, situations where we're feeling pretty well about the way the person will come out of it, and if in fact their story is shown and they still feel like that they've made strong decisions that really are still centered in their best sense of their own emotional well-being. None of that's perfect. Anybody that says it's perfect hasn't done the work. But that's how we kind of look at those safety issues and how we teach it to the people we train to be potential facilitators. Is kind of don't do that until you really get other training besides what we do, or you bring people in the room that have that training. Thank you for the question, though, Sarah.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Hi, guys.
Do you have
Adam?
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey, Autumn.
So this is all really fascinating for me. I've never been to a digital storytelling conference before. I think I do a little bit of digital storytelling in the fact that, like, I play with iMovie. I like putting stories together. I like to tell stories. I was raised on country music, so like there's that kind of like
on my heart.
Right. And I mean, a lot of those are like sad stories, but that was one of the things I always loved about that music as a kid was that it had stories behind it. It wasn't just, you know, pop music kind of thing. There was something going on behind that. Yep. What I really love is that what I really love that you guys are telling me that I like to hear is that this conference is so varied, because I think about story, I think about the idea of story outside of digital tools, outside of any of that, and it's so varied. Each one of our experiences are so unique. And so it sounds to me like you really are bringing together all of these different stories, and the digital part of it is just like extending that reach. It's like making those stories even more accessible to more people, and I'm getting chills when I talk about it because that kind of thing, I just love it. As far as a question, I was wondering, Joe, if maybe you could tell us your story of how you came to digital storytelling, just like in a nutshell. I don't know if that's maybe too much to ask, or...
I mean, the nuttiest shell I can do is, you know, I'm the son of union organizers. When I came of age, when I was, you know, in my late teens, early 20s, I became a professional activist of sorts, working in a lot of different campaigns, feeling like I was my father's son, the son of a union organizer, doing, you know, international solidarity work and education access work and tenants' rights work and all these unionism. And then I think Reagan got elected, and I went, if you don't just control the story, you don't get it, right? I mean, that storytelling is what contemporary television politics are about. You know, at some level, you better be a good storyteller. So I went back to my earlier interest in high school of theater. I ran a theater for a decade. Because I'm in the Bay Area, I had access to all of these companies. I had people on my board from Adobe and Apple, and I went, well, what are you working on? Well, we're doing a little thing in video. It's called QuickTime. Really, that's that'll never work, you know? So I was like close enough to the ground zero of the new media tsunami that swept, you know, through California in the early 90s, that it was an easy bandwagon to jump on, and to kind of see what my community arts perspective, my kind of politicized artistic perspective, how it might connect. And I think from the Bay Area and from the kind of local community-based programs we could do in San Francisco and then in the East Bay, you know, we could get a pretty rich feedback loop from a lot of characters who were doing, you know, the work in dance and theater and muralism and all these, you know. So, and in media, you know, we could get feedback from really super incredible media professionals. So it just created a little bit more solid incubator, moving from this theater company to this multimedia business. And then it was just sort of a commitment on our part, particularly after we got to UC Berkeley, to become more of a national, international resource. I mean, we stopped being essentially a local organization. And we said, yeah, we'll train people. And it was also just our sustainability. We were independent, and the local community wasn't going to pay us enough to keep alive, you know. So we needed to go in and say, yeah, we'll do that there and there and there. And you know, as an organization, we get no funding. So we do like 70 to 90 contracts a year from all over the place. I have a staff of about 10 now. And you know, it's a very weird way of surviving, but somehow we kept it going, and people have been very interested in doing it. And I'd say the only thing that really I come from like a place in Texas where talking like a progressive, a leftist, was sort of marginal in the extreme, right? It still is. And story was kind of how you got over. You know, I grew up as sort of at the knees of Ann Richards. I played with Cecile Richards, who's got a big battle on her hands to keep Planned Parenthood, which she runs, going this week, right? You know, so I grew up with all these people, and they just were funny, and they told stories, and they really believed in the power of ordinary people's lives. And so that part I do think is a little bit of a shadow over the main trend of digital storytelling. Or for the Chicago, Studs Terkel, my dad gave me that book, Working, just before he died. And it was basically like, this is what it's all about, son. These people's lives matter. And I went, okay, I'll read that book. And so, whoever those characters were, I'm only a student of what was the great work of 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s of people valuing individual stories by classes and communities that were simply invisible in the mainstream.
It's an awesome story. Thank you for sharing it with us.
And we'll turn to Joe Murphy. Joe Murphy, do you have the floor? Last question, and then we'll let you guys get off to lunch.
One of the interesting things that I've been hearing are people who are intentionally experimenting with some, we actually had a speaker yesterday who called it lowercase d, lowercase s. And what are the other forms of digital storytelling or the tweaks to this form? And in fact, in the session this morning, it was raised as a question, how important is teaching either story theory or artistic form? What's the weight of that kind of instruction versus the weight of just being? Yeah. And I was wondering if you could riff on those ideas of kind of what else is out there and how it connects, or how we might do it differently.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in my own work, I think I'm moving from a perspective. I mean, like the book I'm working on next will be more about listening than telling. So there, in some ways, when you think about the aspect of the work that's process-oriented, it's about how you create listening spaces in the way that Parker Palmer or other people who are really good at, in the old Quaker way. It's like just sit and hold people, and you don't say shit. You don't tell them what to do. You just listen, right? That I think that part of it is very important. It influences the way you do interview process. It influences the way you teach, right? I mean, listening is an act of love, is what Dave Isay says at StoryCorps. It influences a whole bunch of your life if you listen deeply. And in some ways, when you think that way, then you're sort of saying, well, the artifactual component of it is somewhat secondary to the process or to the mechanism of creating space for listening. And in that sense, I think there are a lot of people experimenting with, I mean, it could be as simple as we met, we shared these stories, and we summed up something out of it, and we walked away. But it could also just be a piece of writing. It could be one image and a piece of writing. It could be just audio. It could be, audio in a more complex film. Everybody's experimenting with that, and obviously everybody has a slightly different skill set, interest, way they're founding their own practice that goes, well, I'm informed by this interest in immigrant voice, and therefore I'm in the middle of environments where literacies are different, and we're not going to privilege writing. Writing is not really what it's about. It's about voice. Or, using the same example, they're immigrants and they're extremely at risk to tell the truth. So can they write fiction? Because fiction actually may be where they need to do the work, right? It's like, if I say what really happened to me, I'm at risk. I mean, the story gets out and I'll get arrested. So, to me, all of those things are being experimented with. There is a lot of conceptual art background that I have that I kind of leave behind. But I have a lot of friends who bring it in, so they're like the Part Island project that I mentioned about the Bronx. A lot of conceptual artists want to experiment with storytelling in ways that are, they don't even, the word narrative is not, they're not friendly to that. So it's like, what are all those other ways, that you can essentially allow people to experience some part of themselves showing up. Well, if you back up enough, we're just saying creativity, right? It's like the creative act, and it means everything and nothing. So I still think there's a mainstream to this work, and it will be reacted to. But it's not a canon either. It's not like, well, you know, the only way to do a digital story is this way, you know. But that mainstream is something that's useful for a lot of people to learn the basics of, but it's equally useful to let go of it and experiment and riff off of it. As I like to use the metaphor, you got to know the blues before you can play jazz. So, you know, we teach blues,
That's
but
good.
we love jazz.
That's good.
I think that's an amazing connection. I was going to ask about the metaphors you reference in all of the work you do. I love that piece you say, listen deeply, and connecting it to Parker Palmer's work around letting silence speak. And I really like that connection that you built for me here today. And then let the story tell itself. In terms of, you know, the moments that matter in people's lives. I think
I mean, the
the words
connections are all there. You know, I think of another Ohio theorist, David Cooper Ryder, who kind of gave us appreciative inquiry as a methodology in community building. I mean, if you think about that, those are just story circles, right? They're story circles where the valuation of each voice is not across the border of opinion, but it's across the embodied notion of I've experienced this and I've learned this through very important connections I have, my family's point of view, my community's point of view. And if I tell you that story, you can hear it. Whereas if you say I'm against abortion or I'm for abortion, you know, you don't hear it. But if you hear something else, then you can hold both stories simultaneously. All of this is technology this society needs and many other societies need in order to overcome seemingly intractable political events, which will be like when Ohio votes next year in the general election. And you guys better figure out how not to vote for Donald Trump. I'll just tell you that right now. You're responsible over there. You know, you can even elect Kasich because he's like, you know, the lightest of all those characters. But for God's sakes, don't let Donald Trump become president.
I think the other piece that you really connected nicely for me today is that ethical piece. And you know, people who tell their stories are at risk, are putting themselves at risk if they make those stories public. It's that grade 8 student that has, you know, an incredible moment that could be an amazing story, but it's a personal transformative story for them, not necessarily one that can be shared with their colleagues or peers in their class.
Yeah.
And that's the piece. It's that telling of the story is important. The publication of the story is the step that is almost permissive. I give permission for my story to be shared publicly.
Yeah.
I have the ownership and authorship of that story. And I think that's an important piece that you connected in terms of the healthcare stories. I think would be a really important piece too. So thank you for putting that connection there for me.
Interesting. I'm sorry. I just wanted to fill in. There was an interesting conversation which I think touches on the ethical, just about what story do I want to tell, what story do you want me to tell, and then what story do I think you want me to tell. And it's not that any of those things are necessarily wrong. I mean, if you're doing healthcare stories and someone says, well, I want to talk about my kitty, I think it's reasonable to say, how does that relate to our healthcare stories? Because this might not be the particular story circle for you to do that in. But I think that's another area of facilitation that those of us who would be in the facilitative role really have to give a lot of thought to.
Yeah, excellent. I am going to sign off shortly. A quotable quote, Joe Lambert, something that people can take and tweet from this conversation.
Oh, you're going to put me on the spot.
Isn't a good interviewer supposed to do that at the end?
You know, I would say, you know, you heard me say it, is that when we listen deeply, there is always the potential that something in somebody else's story will change something profound in our own. And that really, you know, this idea of, yeah, I may get to tell my own story. So that's the quote. You can now record that. So the idea is, I may be in an environment where I'll get to make my own little tale, and I'll feel empowered or what. I may or may not. But if I'm in a group of people where I happen to be fortunate enough that somebody's right at the point where they have a profound and important insight about what it means to be human, that, you know, that's an enormous possibility for growth for me. And I think a lot of us do the work because we're privileged to see other people come, you know, sort of to a new awareness about what's really important about being. And so that's all I'll say. That was my best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day, you people, and we'll keep you informed. Yeah, I think there's a Twitter feed, by the way. Voices of Change is the Twitter feed. So if you follow that, you know, there's a few people are going off a lot. Brian Alexander, who's a great writer, is doing a lot of tweeting, and I think other people are. So you can hear about different sessions, etc.
Thank you very much for your time, Joe. We really appreciate it. And talk to you again, Joe. I'm stopping the podcast